Welcome to the channel. Today we're going to take some scrap silver that I had laying around in my jewelry bench. And we're going to turn it into a textured ring. So stay with me and here we go. Alright, here's my scrap silver. A part of an old band, some slag, and a ring and a pendant. Just some things I had laying around. I thought we would make a project. So we'll put it into the crucible. Now we will use our mold and spray a little WD-40 in there to ensure we get a good pour. And I put the mold back together and then use this clamp. It just ensures that everything stays put when I pour. Put a little borax on the material. It acts as a flux and helps the material to flow. Now here I have it heated up into a molten silver puddle. And once it's hot enough, we'll pour it into the mold. And there we go. Here it goes. Oh boy, little over pour. I miscalculated and poured a little too much and I had a little bit of a mess coming out of there, but my ingot turned out okay. So we'll pull it out and file it. Now here, what I'm doing is just taking the parting lines off of the mold, and then I'm going to end up tapering one of the ends. So that way it'll go into my rolling mill with that little tapered edge, and it just is kind of a nice lead-in once I start rolling the material out. Here's my rolling mill. So I'm just going to adjust it to just so the material starts fitting in there, and so I find exactly where I need to be so it will fit just in there and with a little pressure on it, and then I'll start to roll it through. And I usually do 1 or 2 passes just to make sure everything's lined up okay, and then I continue to turn the dial. Usually a half turn is about right on this machine anyway for one run through the mill. And here's a couple different angles. Here I'm making square stock, so this mill I can do half round, flat, and square. And so in this instance I wanted to do a kind of a square shanked ring, so we're going to go ahead and make it go through the square dies. And as I do this, you get a feel for it, like how much you can turn that dial. Silver and copper you can run through and take pretty big bites, just to reduce the amount of times you have to run it through. But as you do it, it work hardens the material, so it will require annealing, which needs to happen after a few passes. If you don't anneal, the material can become brittle, and then you start getting cracking and you won't be able to form your ring correctly. But in this case, I just ran it through a few passes. I'm just flattening it here prior to the next step. This is my anvil that was made out of an old railroad track, which is pretty cool. The only disadvantage is the material of the anvil is pretty soft, so that there's a lot of dings and it needs to be redressed, but nonetheless, it comes in pretty handy. Now I'm running it through the mill again because I wanted a square stock, but I do want it slightly narrower on the edges. So I'm just running it through the flat part in order to give me the dimensions that I wanted for this particular project. Alright, so here's my ring blank sizing chart. It's pretty handy. In this instance, we're going to do a 2.6, I believe, millimeter thickness, and we want a size 7. So it looks like 62.2 millimeters is the length of stock we need to cut in order to make the band the correct size. And what I like to do is file the end of my material so it's flat, and then measure it out, of course, from the flat side so I can get an accurate measurement. So we'll go 62.2 and scribe a mark, then we'll go ahead and start cutting the material. Okay, now before I form the ring, I want to anneal the silver, which means we're going to heat this up until it's a dull red color. So I have a little smith torch, or actually it's a Gentech, I believe. It's the same thing though. And we're going to heat the silver up until it's a dull red. And a lot of times I turn my lights off. You might have noticed I turn my light off in filming. We'll get it to a dull red. There it's starting to get red, and we will quench it, and that will anneal the material. And I actually did not record myself forming the ring, but it's formed here, and I am soldering it. This is sterling silver hard solder, and you want to heat the material up just enough so it flows. And here we're back at the bench. We're going to take our steel mandrel and a leather mallet and round this ring out. But be careful, seriously, anytime you're doing this, if you hit your fingers, you will get an instant blister. It'll hurt like crazy too. So be careful when you're doing this as you turn the ring, and make sure it is all rounded out. You want to flip it over like I just did, and do the other side too. And then you want to go to the inside of the ring and take a sanding drum, and you're going to want to smooth out that solder joint. This one didn't have a lot of smoothing that was necessary, so I can go right to the sanding drum. But if it has more material, you might need a cylinder burr to go in there and remove more material to get a smooth finish. And with this particular ring, I had to fuse some silver. I had some porosity, so I had to fuse some silver onto the outside of this ring. So I had some bumps I wanted to get smoothed out. Otherwise, I typically wouldn't do this step right now. I would wait until I put the texture on the ring, because once I texture it, it's going to deform the edges as well, and I'll have to go back and smooth it out. Okay, after filing, I'm going to flat lap it on sandpaper. So I am turning this a quarter turn as well as doing a circular motion just to make sure this gets flat. So I just want to keep turning it to make it a consistent sand, and that way there's no inconsistencies and it's all extremely flat. Okay, now we will go to the top of the ring. When you form a ring, it's going to have it where the outside edges are raised up slightly more than the middle of the ring. So I'll take my favorite Brett file once again, and I'm going to smooth out those fusing spots that I had to fuse on the ring, as well as just the normal deforming that you get when you form a ring. I'm going to smooth all that out so it's a nice and flat surface, because I want my ring to be flat on top. It's kind of a square edge band, and that's the look we're going for. Alright, filing's done. This is what it should look like after you're done filing. It still has a lot of marks in it, of course. It's not a fine polished finish, but that's okay. We still have a lot of work to do. And which is this? Sanding. Making jewelry is seriously filing and sanding until your heart is completely content and maybe a little bit sick of it, actually. And so we're going to file this thing and get all of the marks out from the file with 400 grit sandpaper. And then I moved to 600 grit, and then I moved to 1500 grit, and then I can polish it. So it's actually a 4-step process to get to a mirror finish. It's the file, 400, 600, 1500, and then polishing, actually 5 steps. Make sure to stay flat with your ring and your sandpaper. Make sure you have a nice right angle. Now, prepping for our texture. We're going to take our cross peen hammer and give that cross peen a nice mirror finish with my polishing wheel. So I'm just going to my buffer and I am polishing it. Make sure you hang on to that hammer. You do not want that to get caught in the polishing wheel and go flying across the shop. I'm just going ahead and redressing it. I already had a mirror finish on it, but I was redressing it to make sure it was just right for this project. Now it's texture time. We'll take this cross peen and our mandrel and our ring, and I'm gonna give it a good hit. Here we go, let her buck, right? So I know the camera's shaking because I had it mounted in my bench, which I'll have to fix that in the future. But anyway, we're just doing our cross peen on here, and be sure to keep your fingers clear. You do not want an instant blister and possibly some blood spatter all over your bench. While texturing this ring, I actually popped the seam, and you'll see that in a photo or a video in just a second here. But as I was hammering, the seam popped, and So I had to go back and resolder it. There it is. Which isn't a problem. Okay, I resoldered that. Now we're going back to our sanding drum to smooth out the inside once again. And so it's kind of a repeat process once this has been textured and I resoldered. So sanding that seam, getting the inside nice and shiny, and all of the dings or marks are coming out of it right now. Actually, just kidding. That was not doing the trick. So I'm going to a cylinder burr, and we are going to remove more metal so we can get this thing absolutely smooth on the inside. There's nothing worse than feeling a ring on the inside and feeling bumps or inconsistencies within the band when you're wearing it, especially for someone who's making jewelry. It's bothersome. So I'm going to go ahead and really get this thing smooth with the cylinder burr. Then I have to repeat the process of sanding once again. After this, we're going to switch over to our barrette file, because once I textured the band, it got quite lumpy and bumpy on the outside. So let's smooth that baby out. Going back to our barrette file, and just make sure you keep it flat. So you just want to make sure everything is a horizontal pattern. You're keeping everything flat. You're turning the ring so you're not, angling off to one side or the other. And it just takes practice. It takes a while to get used to it. It takes a while to flatten everything out correctly. One thing I like to do is a comfort fit on the inside of my bands. That way they're extremely comfortable to wear, and they come on and off a lot easier. They won't cut into your finger. And so here I'm just taking a Sharpie. We're going to paint this thing black, and then I will mark exactly how much I want to take off for my comfort fit, because we're going to cut off the inside corner of this ring with a cylinder burr. So now it's marked. Let's grab our caliper, and we are marking this thing. So it's about half the distance of the thickness of the band is what I typically like to do, depending on the thickness. So it's kind of by feel. This is approximately half of the thickness of the band. So mark one side, flip it over, do the exact same thing on the other side. And once you're done marking, you can start cutting the metal. Okay, cylinder burr once again. I love using this because it hogs material, and it's just, I don't know, I have metal in my blood, I think. I just love working with any kind of metals, specifically when it comes to jewelry. So I am holding this at maybe a 45-degree angle, and I'm just going to keep going around. I sped it up a little bit because it does take a while, because you want to go slow and make sure you're consistent. You don't want to be all wonky and have more taken out of one spot than another. You want to follow your line and make sure you're just kissing your line as you go around. And once you do the 45-degree angle, I bring the burr up a little bit on the inside edge, and I'll do the same thing to the inside edge just so it has a nice rounded feel. And then flip it over, do the exact same thing on the other side so they match nicely, and you'll have a nice flow once it's finished. Alright, we're about wrapped up with the cylinder burr. We're going to do a change out and switch over to our inside drum sanding attachment. Put that in our flex shaft, tighten it up, and here we go again. Now our whole goal here is just to remove the marks we made with the cylinder burr with this particular grit of sandpaper. So you follow exactly what we did with the cylinder burr, but you do it with sandpaper. And I do the wobbler to get the inside of the ring. Sometimes it works great, just so you don't have to go on and on and on. And these cylinders do wear out. As this piece flew off, I had to pull it off. They do wear out, and they're made for that. So you just pull a little piece off, you have new fresh sandpaper, and keep going at it until you get all the marks out from the cylinder burr. We're going to switch over now to a 320 grit, which is a lot more fine than the previous coarse that we were just using. And now you're going to do the same thing yet again, following what you did with the cylinder burr, and then the coarse grit sandpaper, and now the 320 sandpaper. And like I said, finishing metals to a mirror finish is a process, and you have to go through these steps. Otherwise, you'll remain with all these gouges in there where you won't be able to get them out. And now we're at 1500. So this is as high as I go on my flex shaft. I go up to the 1500, and it's really close to a mirror finish with the 1500 sandpaper. And from there, I can go onto a buffing compound and a polishing wheel that I can get the rest of the marks out. Now we're gonna go to the sides. I always want to start on the inside of a ring, then the sides, then the top. So, oh man, seriously, I keep dropping this thing. Here we go, sped up, 400 grit, 600 grit, and then 1500 grit. And I'm just holding it in my fingers so it doesn't slide around, but keeping everything flat and true is really what you want to be doing when you're kind of flat lapping the side of the ring. So once again, we're trying to get all the marks out. So we filed it, then we're going to do 400, then 600 to get the 400 marks out, and then 1500 to get the 600 marks out, and then we can polish it to a mirror finish. So going through the process, and it is time consuming, but in the end you end up with a beautifully polished piece, and you won't see any of the scratch marks from the previous things that you had to do to it. We're going to jump to the top of the ring. Now, I noticed it was sharp on the edge, so I decided to take a barrette file and put a 45-degree angle as a bevel. And that way I just took the sharp edge off, and it actually adds a really nice feature to the ring, and there won't be any sharp edges. Now it's polish time. This is called Green Zam, Z-A-M, and I put it on my polishing compound onto the buffing wheel, and I'm doing the inside first. So back and forth, twisting, and getting all the edges that we previously worked with our files or with the sanding discs, and that way we get all of the scratches out. We can make it an absolute mirror finish. And another thing, when you're buffing like this, the rings do get hot. So anytime you're polishing, they do get hot. Some people wear gloves. In this video, I'm not. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But either way, again, caution when you're doing these things. You're going to get dirty, it's loud, and it's good to have a dust collection unit like I have here. That way it's not dust all over your shop. And this is the kind of the fluffy wheel. This gives the final finish to the ring. So we're doing the outside edges, and then we'll do the top of the ring too. And that way we got an amazing finish and something you can truly be proud of and put in your jewelry case for sale or wear around town. Alright, polishing is almost complete. Once we're done polishing, we're left with a bunch of compound on the ring. So we'll go and we'll put it in our ultrasonic cleaner. I have mine in a file cabinet with styrofoam around it because I cannot stand the noise, man. The noise of these machines are just ridiculous. And once my machine is hot, I probably let it sit in here for 5 or 10 minutes. And you can see the compound coming off already. Now this is, I don't know, probably 15 minutes later I decided to take it out. So I take it out and I dunk it in water, just making sure I get all of the cleaning solution off of it. And there's my ugly finger again. And our polished and clean ring. Next is a stamp. Now every piece of jewelry needs to have an indicator of what material it is. This one is 925 sterling silver. So we're going to stamp it STER to indicate that it is sterling silver. And here's our completed project. We have a nice textured cross-peen sterling silver ring that we made out of scrap material that was laying around my jewelry bench. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Be sure to subscribe and like if you like this content.